I funded my sister's medical school for 7 years. After graduation, she sued me over our grandfather's inheritance. Your job is to sacrifice. That's where you belong, she told me. At the inheritance hearing, I gave the judge an envelope. He looked at her and started laughing. For 7 straight years, I covered every dollar of my sister's medical education. And the moment she finally walked across that stage, she turned around and dragged me into court over our grandfather's inheritance. Your whole purpose is to give things up, she told me flat out. That's where you belong in this family. At the inheritance hearing, I quietly handed the judge an envelope, and after reading it, he looked straight at my sister and laughed so hard it echoed. My name is Jack Turner. I'm 33 years old, the oldest sibling, and I'm the guy who cleans up problems everyone else pretends aren't there. I make my living as a private investigator, handling skip tracing, background checks, insurance scams, and sometimes tracking down spouses who aren't really staying late at work. I pay attention to details most folks overlook, and I listen closely to the silences people think don't count. In my family, that skill set turned me into the cleanup crew. When something broke, I fixed it. When someone fell apart, I paid for it. 7 years of doing exactly that. 7 years of covering my sister Emily's tuition, rent, exam fees, scrubs, and textbooks that still had the plastic wrap on them. 7 years of convincing myself that once Emily became a doctor, all of it would make sense. I learned how to live cheap without complaining. I survived on instant noodles, worn-out boots, and a car that rattled like a marching band. I took side jobs under the table to keep cash flowing. My mom called me resourceful whenever she needed help and labeled me obsessive the second I tried to set a limit. My dad called it being a man, which in our house always translated to being a walking bank account. The night everything finally tipped started in my mom's kitchen, with fake marble countertops and a refrigerator humming like it was nervous. I showed up carrying groceries because she'd texted that they could use help making dinner. I was slicing onions when my sister walked in, her crisp white coat folded over her arm like a superhero cape. Take tomorrow off, my mom said without even glancing my way. Emily needs you to drive her downtown. It's her white coat ceremony. I told her I already planned to be there and had cleared my afternoon. Emily casually grabbed the mail off the counter like she owned the entire house. You'll actually be on time, right? She asked. Don't pull that PI disappearing act. I told her I'd never missed anything important. She didn't even look at me. You miss plenty, Jack. You just cover it up with money. That one hit. But I kept chopping because onion tears are a good excuse to stay quiet. Then my mom added, gently but sharp, like easing a blade under a knot. Your job is to sacrifice. That's just your role in this family. I put the knife down. My job. You know what I mean, she said, her tone soft but unmovable. You're good at supporting, not being in the spotlight. Let Emily shine. Emily finally looked at me, wearing a small, clinical smile. It's really not that complicated. You're meant to stay in the background. Something inside me shifted. My hands didn't shake, but the room felt off, like a crooked picture frame. I wanted to say everything I'd been holding back, but instead I said nothing. I wiped the cutting board, bagged the onions, and told myself I'd smile tomorrow, clap politely, and swallow it down. She earned this, I told myself. Later that same week, Grandpa Walter passed away, and the family group chat exploded. Emily will handle the inheritance hearing after her residency match. Timing matters. Jack can file the paperwork. I replied with okay, and that was my first mistake. The second was thinking I still knew how the rules worked. Grandpa Walter wasn't wealthy in a flashy way. He owned his house outright, had a small lake cabin, a modest investment account, and a 1958 Omega watch he'd always win in card games after telling long-winded stories. He had a soft spot for me and zero tolerance for dishonesty. He once told me, "You can't fake the sound of a real no." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. When I was 26, I started paying Emily's tuition because our parents couldn't. Dad's back was shot, but somehow his golf swing stayed intact. Mom claimed her savings were drained, even though the living room suddenly had a new couch set and a chandelier that made the dining table look small. Emily got into a strong medical school. Everyone cried. I ran the numbers. What started as covering 1 semester turned into a year, then stretched into 7. The loans were put in my name, temporarily, because the interest rates were better, with promises to refinance once Emily was licensed. I paid what financial aid didn't touch. I absorbed overdraft fees, cell phone bills, and even an apartment deposit that bounced because the landlord was sketchy. I kept telling myself I was investing in a person, not throwing money into a pit. The family chats sounded like corporate emails written by people allergic to accountability. Emily is our priority. We're all making sacrifices. I've got this semester handled. Emily's thank yous were inconsistent. Sometimes it was just thanks. Sometimes it came with a heart emoji. Other times it came with a shopping list. Books, lab fees, exam prep. The good course. Mine expires Tuesday. My workload grew heavier. I took surveillance jobs in freezing weather, sat through 8-hour stakeouts fueled by stale coffee, and learned which pawn shops offered fair cash when clients paid late. One crooked landlord tried to pay me with a free month of rent to intimidate an ex-tenant. I turned it down. My rent was already cheap, and my integrity wasn't negotiable. At family dinners, I stayed quiet while listening to plans that didn't include me. Mom talked about Emily's future practice. Dad cracked jokes about me catching cheaters. Emily scrolled on her phone and said things like, "I barely have time to sleep, let alone budget." I'd nod, then slide my debit card across the table when the bill arrived. Then residency match day came. Balloons everywhere. Confetti. Smiling photos captioned, "So proud of our future doctor." I was the one holding the camera. In the middle of the celebration, my mom grabbed my arm and whispered, "By the way, about Grandpa's will, just be reasonable." I asked what she meant by reasonable. "Emily made real sacrifices," she said. "She deserves the house. She'll need the equity to start her life." I reminded her the will hadn't been read yet. "Please don't make this difficult," she said. The will was read on a rainy Tuesday in a conference room that smelled like toner and damp paper. Grandpa left the lake cabin to Emily and me jointly to keep the peace. He left the house to me. The watch went to me. The investments were split 60-40 in my favor, noted as recognition for services rendered. There was a letter addressed to me with a line that burned going down. To the one who paid the bills I never saw. My mom's smile froze in place, but her eyes shifted. My dad immediately asked the lawyer how flexible the wording was. Emily cracked a joke about finally buying a decent coffee machine for the lake cabin. Then she actually looked at the numbers and went completely quiet. By the following day, there was a brand new family group chat that didn't include me at all, and I only found out because someone showed me screenshots later. The messages read like this. "Mom, Jack will give up the house." "Emily, he loves control. He'll make it about the watch." "Dad, we'll manage it. Our boy is sentimental." What I did receive was a phone call. Emily didn't even bother with hello. "Hey, you should sign a quick claim on the house," she said. "It's cleaner that way. I'll pay you out once I'm settled." I asked her how much. She brushed it off and said we'd figure it out later and that I should just do the right thing, adding that I didn't even want a house. I told her I did want it. She laughed and said I lived like a ghost in a one-bedroom with a safe under my bed. I repeated myself, slow and clear, that I wanted the house. Her voice went cold. She told me not to be selfish and said Grandpa wanted what was best for her. I reminded her he had written his wishes down. There was silence. Then she snapped that I was obsessed with rules because I didn't understand love, and that one hit deep. Even then, I didn't say no outright. I told her we could talk after her graduation. 2 weeks later, a process server handed me papers. Emily had filed to contest the will and added a separate claim demanding restitution for so-called family support funds, accusing me of manipulating Grandpa during a period of cognitive decline. The wording sounded ripped straight from a courtroom drama. The evidence attached made my stomach drop because I recognized all of it. There were photos of me leaving Grandpa's house with a folder, screenshots of texts where I'd written things like, "Can I swing by later with the forms?" and copies of checks I'd written with tuition in the memo line, now twisted into proof of control. I called Emily, and she picked up on the second ring. I said one word, "Court." She told me I'd be fine and reminded me I always landed on my feet. I pointed out she was suing me. She sighed and said not to be dramatic, that this was just the cleanest way to handle things and that the judge would understand. She said I could afford a lawyer and insisted it wasn't personal, even though it was nothing but personal. For the first time, she raised her voice and told me I didn't get to make this harder, repeating the line I'd heard before, that my only job was to sacrifice and that was my place in the family. Then she hung up. I stared at my phone and then at the envelope sitting on my desk, the one stuffed with 7 years of receipts, bank transfers, loan statements, and one thing she never expected me to keep. I locked that envelope in my safe, sat down, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself feel the anger all the way through without pushing it aside. The inheritance hearing landed on a Thursday morning. I wore the only suit I own, the one reserved for funerals and the rare client who pays face-to-face. In the hallway outside the courtroom, my mom smoothed Emily's hair like she was still a little kid. My dad told me we could settle this like adults, and Emily stayed glued to her phone before glancing up and telling me not to be theatrical. I told her I'd try. Inside the courtroom were hard benches, a ticking clock that sounded tired, and a judge with half-moon glasses who carried the look of a man who'd watched families tear themselves apart over houses barely worth the fight. Emily's lawyer sounded very expensive. Mine was Eva, a friend who knew me back when I was just the kid who could crack any locker. Emily went first, speaking in a calm, clinical tone, framing everything as concern and protection. She claimed her brother isolated our grandfather in his final year and inserted himself into financial decisions, conditioning support to gain leverage. She used phrases like undue influence and fiduciary breach, and I watched the judge's eyebrows stay perfectly still. Her lawyer passed around printouts, photos of me at Grandpa's house, and text logs that made it look like I ran his life. None of it was fake, it just wasn't the full picture. When it was my turn, Eva asked where my money had gone for 7 years. I answered, to Emily. She asked why. I said because she wanted to be a doctor and I believed in her. Emily let out a quiet snort, and my mom shot me a look like I'd said something unforgivable. Eva nodded, and I pulled a thick, ugly envelope from my briefcase, rubber-banded tight, and walked it to the clerk. I explained it held financial records, every transfer, every rent payment, every exam fee. The judge accepted it. Then I said there was one more thing and took out a second envelope, smaller and yellowed with age. I'd found it in Grandpa Walter's desk under his chessboard a week after he died. It was addressed to Emily, and I'd never opened it, even when I was tempted to destroy it. I handed it to the bailiff and told the judge it was a letter Grandpa left for my sister and that she should read it herself. Emily looked genuinely confused for the first time that day. She opened the letter carefully, scanned the page, and went still as color crept into her face. Eva moved on just like we'd planned, submitting screenshots of messages Emily had sent to friends and to our mom, where she wrote that keeping tuition in my name was safer because she could always guilt me if something went wrong, and later admitted she planned to scare me with a lawsuit so I'd hand over the house. Emily's attorney objected. Eva laid the foundation, and the judge flipped through the pages before asking if they contested authenticity. After a whispered exchange, the lawyer said they reserved. The judge noted it dryly. I asked the judge if I could read the last line of the letter Grandpa had written to me, and he allowed it briefly. I read aloud. Jack, if anyone ever tells you your job is to sacrifice, tell them no. Emily rolled her eyes and said Grandpa always wrote little sayings like that. The judge turned to her and asked if she'd like to summarize the letter she'd just read. She folded it once, then again, and said it was private. The judge reminded her she was the one who filed, and that this was discovery by any other name. She swallowed and admitted Grandpa wrote that the house should be mine because I never asked for things, and that she had already been given enough. The room fell so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. My mom whispered that it wasn't what he meant. The judge looked at me, and I pulled out my phone and said I had one more piece of context, a short video, a 30-second clip filmed in my grandfather's kitchen. He's sitting at the kitchen table in the video, Grandpa Walter with the old watch wrapped around his wrist, and he looks straight at the camera before glancing over toward Emily, who's standing just out of frame. His voice is steady and clear when he speaks. Sweetheart, I'm proud of you, he says. And when you're a doctor, you're going to pay Jack back every dollar. He pauses, then adds, we can even write it down if that helps you remember. I stopped the video there and pointed out the timestamp, explaining it was recorded 2 years before he passed. Emily immediately said it was a joke, that Grandpa joked like that all the time, and that we joked that way as a family. The judge leaned back in his chair, eyes moving from the frozen image on the screen to the letter in his hand, then back to Emily. He let out a slow breath through his nose, the kind you make when you're trying not to say something sharp. Then he did something I'd never seen a judge do before. He looked directly at my sister, smiled just a little, and started laughing. It wasn't cruel laughter, more like the reaction of someone who'd just heard the boldest lie imaginable delivered with total confidence. When he finally pulled himself together, he addressed the attorneys and said my sister's position didn't hold water, and unless she wanted to drag this into a full trial and foot everyone's legal bills for the pleasure, he strongly suggested they use the next 5 minutes to discuss dismissing the case with prejudice. Then he turned back to Emily and added quietly that her brother wasn't a bank. Emily stared down at the table. My mom reached for her hand and came up empty. My dad suddenly looked much older than he had that morning. There was no gavel slam, because there wasn't one, but something inside me still gave way, like a rope snapping clean through after being pulled too tight for too long. We wrapped things up in the hallway, though calling it a settlement feels generous. Eva drafted a single-page agreement on a bench while a bailiff stood nearby, eating a muffin. Emily withdrew everything, agreed not to challenge the will, and also agreed to stop contacting my clients, which she had apparently been doing by sending concerned sister emails about my mental stability. In return, I agreed not to pursue sanctions. My mom tried to reframe it as a normal family conflict and said it was all just a misunderstanding. I looked at her and reminded her she'd told me my role was to sacrifice. She flinched and said she'd been upset. I told her she'd been honest. Emily wouldn't look at me as she folded Grandpa Walter's letters smaller and smaller, like she was trying to make them disappear. She said quietly that I'd humiliated her. I reminded her she'd sued me. I told her that video was the only reason she couldn't lie her way through me the way she'd been doing since we were kids. She stiffened and accused me of thinking she was the villain, said she was exhausted and had worked incredibly hard. I told her I had too, but only one of us had sent the other a bill for it. We stood there afterward like people holding claim tickets for luggage that never showed up. My dad suggested brunch like nothing had happened. Eva made a face that said absolutely not. I told them I needed to get back to work. Instead, I drove straight to the house. It's modest, with front steps that sag a little and a porch light switch that crackles when you flip it. I sat on the living room floor holding Grandpa Walter's watch in my hand, the keys pressing into my thigh through my pocket. The silence felt different than before, not empty, just open, like it was waiting for something new. That night, I took the spreadsheet tracking 7 years of payments and dropped it into a folder labeled closed. Then I did something reckless and ordered a pizza with every topping I wanted, no coupons, no guilt. I turned my phone face down and left it there. The weeks that followed were quiet in a good way, like the city had thrown a blanket over me and told me to rest. I replaced the small safe under my bed with a larger one bolted into the hall closet and moved my case files there. I finally fixed the serpentine belt in my car that had been whining for months. I took exactly one new client, a woman whose ex had disappeared with their dog. We tracked him down 2 states away, got the dog back, and when she cried into its fur, I didn't charge her for the last hour. People who knew Emily reached out. Some were furious on my behalf, asking how she could do that. Others tried to soften it, saying she was under a lot of pressure. My favorite message came from an attending physician who'd supervised her overnight shifts. He said she was brilliant, but had never learned how to apologize. Emily tried another approach not long after. She showed up at my porch with coffee and a look that said she was ready to be the good sister as long as we both pretended none of it had happened. I told her through the screen door that I wasn't interested in pretending. She said she'd paid me back. I told her no, she'd just dropped the invoice. She said it was the same thing. I told her she could come inside once she understood the difference. I didn't open the door. She left the coffee on the step, and an hour later it was cold. I poured it down the sink. My mom started texting holiday plans like a project manager, sending calendar invites. I didn't reply. My dad left voicemails about starting over, and I saved one so I could listen to his voice when I missed the version of him I used to believe in. The house slowly began to feel like it actually belonged to me. I found Grandpa Walter's old screwdriver set in a drawer mixed in with pennies and rubber bands. I fixed the sagging front step. I swapped out the porch light for a motion sensor one, not because I needed it, but because that kind of security makes me feel better, an occupational side effect. One Tuesday, I opened a savings account and labeled it Cabin Fund. I texted Emily one sentence, asking her to let me know when she wanted to start covering her half of the cabin expenses. She replied with a heart emoji and nothing else, which was fine. I also called the loan servicer and used my share of the inheritance to pay off every loan that had been sitting under my name for years. Watching the balance drop to zero felt like cutting loose a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. My work shifted in subtle ways after that. I stopped taking cash jobs that felt dirty, like digging up everything you can on someone just because a landlord wants leverage. I started taking more custody cases and a few elder abuse investigations, and I learned I'm good at listening to people who were taught they don't deserve to be believed. About a month after the hearing, Emily emailed me saying residency was brutal and she was stuck on nights, asking if we could talk when things slowed down. I typed no, then erased it and wrote that I wasn't available to be her reset button, but we could talk after she sent me a repayment plan for what she'd promised Grandpa Walter. I attached a spreadsheet with clear columns, amounts, dates, and 0% interest because I wanted to sleep at night. She didn't respond. 2 weeks later, a transfer showed up for $500 with the memo reading first, then $300 after her next paycheck, then nothing for a while, then $1,000 after an extra shift. There was no apology, no explanation, just money arriving with lowercase notes like sorry late. Then my car broke down and the repair bill hit me hard, and the money she sent wasn't enough to fix everything. But it was enough to prove one thing clearly. She knew exactly what she was doing. My mom sent a group text on my birthday full of balloon emojis and exclamation points, and I didn't reply. Instead, I drove up to the lake cabin by myself. I read Grandpa Walter's letter again, wound to watch, and let the ticking fill the quiet room until it felt occupied by something steady. I said the word no out loud to no one in particular, and it felt clean when it left my mouth, not cruel or spiteful, just honest. What I didn't expect was this part, that life after no is louder. Food tastes better. A dumb joke from a mechanic in a grease-stained hat can make you smile all the way back to your car. Friends, the ones you kept rescheduling and making excuses for, stop being distractions and start feeling like anchors. I stopped being the guy who lives on hold and started answering my own calls. I always thought closure would come with a big speech or a dramatic moment, but instead it showed up as an ordinary afternoon marked by a small sound. The mail slot clacking as an envelope slid onto my rug. There was no return address, and inside was a cashier's check for $8,000 with a short note in Emily's handwriting that said, "For the spring. I'll keep going." There were no hearts, no love, not even an apology, just a ledger entry finally admitting what she'd denied for years. I stood there holding it for a long time, then put the check into the cabin fund and made myself a grilled cheese sandwich so indulgent it would make a nutritionist wince. I ate it on the porch while the new motion light clicked on and off every time a moth tried to claim the night. People still tell me I'm strong, and what they usually mean is that I kept paying even when it hurt. But strength isn't hauling a house full of other people's furniture on your back until your knees give out. Strength is setting the furniture down and locking your door. Strength is saying no and not explaining yourself until your voice is gone. My mom still sends group texts, and sometimes I read them and sometimes I don't. My dad called last week to say their lawn needs work, and I told him there's a number you can call for that. He laughed like he thought I was joking, but I wasn't, and we ended the call politely, like neighbors. I still see Emily now and then on early mornings when she stumbles out of the hospital after a long shift, her eyes thin and tired like paper. Once she spotted me across the street and lifted a hand, and I lifted mine back, not a truce and not a war, just something else, a boundary that holds. If you were hoping for revenge, I don't have it, because the judge's laugh was enough. Everything that came after, the quiet house, the steady ticking of the watch, the dog case that ended with a wagging tail, the spreadsheet labeled closed, does the job better than any speech ever could. So here's the moral, plain and simple. I am not a wallet, I am not a background character, and I am not a job description written in someone else's handwriting. I am a person, and my answer is no when no is the right answer. And here's the promise I made to myself standing on the cabin dock at sunset, the watch solid on my wrist, and the water moving like a slow breath. I will never again let anyone tell me my only job is to sacrifice, because that isn't love, that's theft with manners. I'm done paying for permission to belong to my own family. I've got my own keys now, and the door opens from my side.